De mi papá fue un rotundo no. No, dijo. ¿Cómo que nos van a dejar a quitar de pescar ahí? Que se vayan a la chingada. Muy grosero. Fue la generación de nosotros la que sí entró con fuerza a decir, ¿sabes qué? Vamos a proteger. No había la cantidad de peces que hay ahorita. Por eso es que nosotros también tomamos la decisión de ya no pescar en esta área, de dedicarnos a otra actividad, que era el ecoturismo. Y que empezamos a ganar, vaya, $1 sin tener que arriesgar más, porque ya va la lancha, ya va ganando. Con la pesca no. Salías y a veces no traías nada, pero te gastabas la gasolina. Él hablaba, me acuerdo muy bien, que él hablaba de la cantidad de tiburones que había en ese tiempo, que dice que los veían aquí en la orilla de la playa así como encimados, como si fueran troncos de madera, y le llamaban a ellos las palizadas. En el invierno puedes contar ahí en el arrecife 80, 100 tiburones. O sea, por eso decimos nosotros las palizadas que mi papá decía. Ya regresaron. Y me da mucho gusto. No hay ninguna actividad de pesca comercial. Estos peces, cuando alcanzan su talla ya madura, se salen a otros fondos cerca del parque. Es ahí donde los vecinos de las comunidades aledañas del parque los pueden aprovechar, los pueden pescar así, ahí en esos lugares, sin tener la necesidad de venirlos a pescar al parque. Le decimos nosotros a nuestros hijos, nosotros logramos que se recuperara, lo solicitamos, nos lo concedieron, ahora a ustedes les toca cuidarlo. Ojalá.
A continuación invitamos a subir al escenario al Ministro de Medio Ambiente de Chile, señor Pablo Badenier, quien moderará el panel Áreas, Marinas, Protegidas.
Muy buenos días a todos y a todas.
Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here in Valparaíso, my birthplace, to open this first panel on protected marine areas.
Congreso Nuestro, Océano. Quiero invitarles a que acá nos acompañan.
I know that today we are with Josh Reichert, who is the Vice President, Managing
Sala,
Director,
Explorador, Residente de National,
the Pew Charitable Trust, Enric Sala, Explorer and Residence, National Geographic Society, George Waters, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA of the United States, and also Pedro Edmonds Paoa, Mayor of Easter Island, Chile, and Doña Bertarelli, co-president of the Bertarelli Foundation. On behalf of the government of Chile, I would like to welcome you to this very important panel to begin this activity. And as the President said, we're hoping that 2015 will be a different year, turning point. Just over 2 weeks ago, all the presidents and heads of state approved the Sustainable Development Goals at the UN, and today we've heard a very important announcement in terms of marine conservation on behalf of President Bachelet, and we're hoping to end a very good year on December the 12th with a very good agreement on climate with the participation by Chile and all countries within the framework of COP21 in Paris. And so I would like to welcome our guests today in this panel on marine protected areas. And first of all, in the same order, be able to invite you to speak. First of all, Josh Reichert, Executive Vice President and Managing Director of the Pew Charitable Trust.
Thank you, Minister Badenier, and good morning, Your Excellencies and distinguished guests. I want to thank President Bachelet and Minister Munoz for convening this important gathering. It's a testament to your collective leadership and vision that so many high-level officials from around the world have gathered in Chile for this ocean conference. In light of the marvelous announcement that was made just minutes ago to move forward in creating the world's third largest marine park in the waters surrounding Easter Island, it has already been well worth the trip. This moment has been long in the making and represents a triumph for the Rapa Nui community, who have worked diligently over the past several years to protect the waters around Easter Island, which are so important to their history, to their culture, and to their economy. In particular, I would like to thank the Mayor of Rapa Nui, Pedro Pablo Edmunds-Paua, and the members of the Rapa Nui Ocean Roundtable, who have played such an important role in making this happen. I also want to thank Secretary Kerry for his announcement and renewed commitment to enhance global cooperation and collaboration in fisheries monitoring, control, surveillance, and enforcement. Each period of history is defined by a unique blend of the mistakes of the past and the opportunities of the future. For our generation, and almost certainly for the one that will follow us, stemming the rampant destruction of the global marine environment transcends all the other challenges we face. This is not simply a moral obligation. It's a very practical one. For unless we succeed, we risk making the planet that we occupy uninhabitable for tens of thousands of species, including our own. For most of human history, the interface between people and nature has been a zone of conflict. The line which separates us from places that have escaped the plow, the drill, and the dredge has continued to advance, leaving a constantly diminished space for nature. Nowhere have these impacts been more pronounced than in the world's oceans. In a little more than 50 years, we have decimated global fisheries, destroyed a great deal of the habitat that's needed for marine life, and filled the oceans with plastics and other refuse that have left areas the size of France without enough oxygen in the water to sustain marine life. Although the current state of the world's marine environment is by no means the responsibility of our generation alone, it is our responsibility to fix it. We are well aware of the problems, as we are the solutions. Our continued failure to implement these solutions is not so much a technical problem as it is a matter of a lack of political will. Most of the marine parks or reserves that have been created encompass large areas of the ocean where no extractive activity is permitted. And of the many tools that we have to ameliorate some of the problems in the world's oceans, marine parks or protected areas convey very special benefits. They're highly flexible. They can be used to protect single species as well as entire ecosystems. They're easy to explain, and they're relatively simple to understand. And while global warming, unless it is curbed, will ultimately erode the benefits that reserves provide, they will buy us some desperately needed time in the broader struggle to save the oceans. Almost 10 years ago, recognizing the speed at which many of the last refuges of ocean wilderness were disappearing, the Pew Trust, along with 6 other organizations, created Global Ocean Legacy, a program to promote the creation of the first generation of the world's great marine parks, 15 in total by 2022. President Bachelet's announcement today and the one last week by Prime Minister Key of New Zealand, creating the Kermadec Ocean Sanctuary, puts us far closer to achieving this goal. Of the 10 largest marine reserves in the world, 8 are greater than 400,000 square kilometers, and 4 of those are larger than 600,000. We have chosen to focus on no-take reserves simply because they constitute the highest standard of conservation in the sea as they do on land. Marine reserves that are properly designed and enforced work. They help to protect biodiversity, they produce more fish, they preserve some of the world's most spectacular seascapes, they are easy for the public to understand, and they provide a living portrait of how ocean ecosystems function when they're healthy. Shortly after we began working on large-scale reserves, it became clear that the ability to enforce restrictions in these areas, primarily those related to fishing, was key to our success or failure. Leaders of coastal nations didn't want to be accused of establishing marine parks that are simply outlines on maps with little or no enforcement on the water, nor did we. As a result, in 2010, we began a major effort to design a global enforcement system aimed at addressing the problem of illegal fishing. This is not a problem that's confined to marine reserves. It affects fishing everywhere, from the exclusive economic zones of individual countries to the high seas. Conventional enforcement relies heavily on aircraft and patrol vessels to detect, pursue, and interdict illegal fishers. It's a system of enforcement that's inherently inefficient. It's expensive, it's often dangerous, and it's relatively ineffective due to the fact that many coastal nations have no interdiction capability. Consequently, we are building an enforcement system that will enable successful intervention to occur in port rather than on the open ocean. And it's going to be cost-effective and affordable to even the poorest of countries. To design this system, we created a small enforcement unit within Pew that's staffed by ex-military personnel, including a former commander of the Royal Navy and 2 former commanders in the U.S. Coast Guard, whose primary experience has been fisheries compliance and enforcement. With the government of Norway, we've established a fisheries crime unit at Interpol. We formed a partnership with the Satellite Applications Catapult, an entity set up by the British government to develop new satellite-based products, services, and applications.
Excuse me, 1 minute.
Okay. We are working with a number of governments on pilot projects designed to strengthen the use of satellite technology to identify and track vessels in near real time that are suspected of illegal fishing. And this system, named Eyes on the Seas, is currently being tested in the waters of various countries and is expected to be operational within the first half of the coming year. When we look back at the establishment of many of the world's most iconic national parks, places like Yellowstone and Yosemite in the United States, there was large resistance from timber, mining, and ranching interests. Indeed, many of these places would never have been designated had it not been for the willingness of a president to override the short-term and highly vested interests of a few for the long-term benefits of many. So, regardless of how good this or any other system may be, it will not succeed unless political leaders are willing to combat vested interests, to refuse to allow the natural patrimony of their people to be whittled away and sold as if it were a commodity, and to leave at least some places as they are, so that our children and those that follow them will know what the ocean looks like, sounds like, and feels like when it's healthy. Presidents and prime ministers are not remembered for what they haven't done. They're judged for the contributions they have made, which will endure the test of time. They are remembered for acts of courage and for leadership in challenging the prevailing wisdom of their times and for creating a nobler vision that guides and illuminates the road ahead. Saving unique places in the world's oceans is a legacy achievement. Long after we are gone, these places will hopefully still be there, serving as living testaments of sound judgment and a commitment to the future. Thank you.
Gracias. Muchas gracias, George.
Thank you very much, George. And now I would like to introduce Enric Sala, Explorer in Residence, National Geographic Society.
Muchas gracias. Monseñor, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, queridos amigos y amigas, today I want to show you that replicating what Chile has done today around the Desventuradas Islands, creating large marine parks in the wildest places in the ocean, is not only an ecological imperative, but also it makes economic sense. And before we talk about protection, we need to mean what do we need by protection. Marine protected areas that everybody talks about range from areas that allow fishing to areas that are no-take marine reserves, fully closed to commercial extraction. And let me give you an example. In 1999, a group of colleagues and I went to the Gulf of California in Mexico, and we surveyed the entire sea in places that were open to all kinds of fishing, areas that were protected but allowed fishing within their boundaries, and this place that you saw in the video, Cabo Pulmo, which had recently become a marine park, a national park, where all commercial extraction was off limits. Then the abundance of fish inside these different areas was the same, about a little less than 1 ton of fish per hectare. We came back 10 years later, and this is what we found. The marine protected areas that allowed fishing were no different from the open access areas, while the only no-take area in the Gulf of California that was well enforced multiplied its fish abundance by 500%. And we have similar data for the Seychelles, the Mediterranean, the Hawaiian Islands, and many places all around the world. And not only these no-take reserves, no-take areas, increase the size of the fish by 1/3 within their boundaries, and on average, they increase their fish biomass by almost 500% within a decade, but also they make these environments more resilient to climate. An example is what happened in Palau. This is an image from a reef in Palau that is unprotected, that was hit by a warming event, by El Niño in 97-98, and then it was hit by cyclones. The reef has not come back. On the other side of Palau, there is a marine reserve that is fully protected, where the corals are coming back. Protection, full protection, makes marine environments more resilient to warming and help us buy time while the leaders of the world will figure out what to do this December in Paris. But then people tell me, okay, you protect an area and there are effects within their boundaries, but what happens to the poor fishermen that are displaced? Well, let's remember that only 1% of the ocean today is fully protected from fishing. So there is not a limitation of places to fish. Also, these areas produce incredible revenue from tourism. This is another example from the beautiful Blue Hole in Palau that attracts a lot of tourism, and that creates many jobs and brings in more economic revenue than exploitation. And the great example of the Great Barrier Reef is one of my favorites. This large marine park, a third of which is fully protected, supports 56,000 jobs and brings $5 billion to the Australian economy. That's a few times more jobs than fishing and 40 times more revenue. And also the fishermen around these areas are catching more, especially in developing areas. There is a place in Mombasa in southern Kenya where the income of fishermen has doubled in just a few years because of the spillover from a small marine reserve there. At National Geographic, we have also committed to contribute to ocean protection. This is a conference, as Minister Muñoz said, is all about commitments. And at National Geographic, we committed years ago to work with governments to help to protect the wildest places in the ocean, places that are still pristine. We've been to 15 of these places already, 7 of which are already protected in large marine parks, including the marine park of the Nazca Desventuradas, which the Chilean government created today, where we work with our partners Oceana and the Juan Fernandez community. And more are coming from the tropics to temperate seas and the polar regions. And still, some people still are skeptic and say, well, yeah, this is very nice, but this is how many of these places can be created? There is not enough money in the world to protect the ocean. And there are governments like New Zealand and the UK and the US and Kiribati and others that are showing that this is not an issue. And let me just show you about the economics of protection of the ocean. Now, we have a study coming up showing that the most pristine ocean occupies about 10% of it. And 10%, coincidentally, is the target of the United Nations of the ocean, percentage of the ocean that should be protected by 2020. Well, an economic study shows that establishing a protected area covering 10% of the ocean would cost about $2 billion. And the cost of managing an area that would cover 10% of the ocean could be as low as $100 million using the satellite technology that George was talking about. Still, there are some people who say this is cost prohibitive, this is too expensive. But let's remember that these numbers are just a fraction of the funds that are used by taxpayers' money, that are used by governments of the world to subsidize fisheries. And most of these $25 billion go to subsidize destructive fishing practices. Therefore, the economics are clear, the science is clear, protecting the wildest places in the ocean, replicating what Chile has done today around the Desventuradas Islands, what New Zealand did around the Kermadec Islands last week, and other countries around the world have done in the last 10 years, is not only an ecological imperative, but it also would help us achieve that first milestone of protection of the ocean, 10%, which is not necessary, not sufficient, but is necessary, but also it makes so much more economic sense to protect these large areas in the ocean that allow their overexploitation and let them vanish before it's too late. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias, Enric.
Thank you very much, Enric. And now I'd like to introduce George Waters, who is National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here today, and thank you for the invitation to speak. I work for the U.S. government, and I can say that the U.S. government has pretty big policy aspirations for establishing marine protected areas in Antarctica, but we can't achieve that unilaterally. It really takes a commitment, a global commitment, to achieve some shared long-term conservation objectives. Antarctica is pristine, Antarctica is unique, Antarctica is remote. Antarctica is the perfect place to establish MPAs. Many of you may not know it, but the goods and services that Antarctica provides touch millions and millions of humans around the globe. Those goods and services include everything from sort of standard fisheries products to amazing opportunities for tourism and science, amazing wilderness values, and things that make our ice cream creamier. There's things we haven't even discovered yet in Antarctica, and there are things that we have discovered which we haven't even valued. When we talk about conserving biodiversity and what MPAs can do for that, we have to remember that conserving biodiversity is the same thing as conserving human well-being. The portfolio of services that Antarctica provides to us is threatened. It's threatened by climate change. Fundamental habitats in Antarctica, like sea ice habitats, are changing as we speak. Those changes are massive and ongoing, and they're different in different places. In some places, sea ice is increasing, and in some places, sea ice is decreasing. And this spatial variation in the changes that are occurring really demands a circumpolar network of MPAs in order to achieve the objectives of providing a continued portfolio of services. So there is one MPA that already exists in Antarctica. That's the green one on the map here. 2 others are currently being negotiated, the blue one and the red one, and then 2 more are being developed as we speak. In general, all of those MPAs are trying to achieve one of 4 objectives or categories of objectives. That's to provide services, to mitigate threats to those services, to promote resiliency so that we can have those services or opportunities for new services in the future despite climate change, and to improve our understanding of the ecosystem. That is, can we learn enough to do a better job of managing human activities in the future? I want to focus on that red one, the Ross Sea. The Ross Sea is basically it's consumed 6 years of my life for the last, I don't know, forever. And one of the key things to remember is the science that underpins MPAs is actually pretty, as somebody said, it's pretty easy. It's pretty simple to boil down. You got to make a bunch of maps about all the activities and all the animals and plants that occur in the ecosystem. And then you have to sit down with policymakers and stakeholders and prioritize everything on those maps. That's the hard part, setting the priorities. This is a map of Adelie penguin habitat in the Ross Sea. Adelie penguins are the cute little ones that are about this big you see on TV all the time. Okay. 1/3 of the world's Adelie penguins feed in that area during the austral summer. That's when they're feeding there, they're trying to catch enough food to bring back to their chicks. We know that the success of that population or those populations is determined by how good the adults are at catching food to bring back to their chicks. Okay, setting a priority for this is a no-brainer, right? There's a lot of animals there, they're feeding their babies, and everybody likes penguins. It gets more complicated when you have a whole bunch of things that you're trying to achieve, when you're trying to provide a portfolio of future and present goods and services. Okay, so then you get maps that look like this with lots of overlays of different things. This map is important for 2 reasons. One, it demonstrates that the boundaries of the proposed MPA enclose things that are important to stakeholders, that are important to policymakers. And 2, it demonstrates why the MPAs being proposed for Antarctica are so big. We are proposing to provide a portfolio of services, and that portfolio is distributed in space. You need a big MPA to cover it all. Once an MPA is established, there has to be a commitment by governments to monitor those MPAs. And I'm talking about scientific monitoring here. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. The reason that's necessary is because climate change is going to change the fundamental underlying maps on which the MPA is based. Okay. This is an example of emperor penguin habitat. Okay. Everybody likes penguins, remember. And these are the big guys. They're taller than some of us in this room. Okay. Climate change is predicted to impact the habitats of these birds in different ways, okay? And on the left side of the map, there's going to be more sea ice there in the future. On the right side of the map, there's going to be less sea ice there in the future. We need monitoring on the ground or on the ice now in order to know when those changes are big enough to warrant revising the boundaries of the MPA. We also need monitoring in order to compare what happens inside the MPA to what happens outside the MPA. And there's 2 reasons for that. One, that's a very important tool for assessing the effectiveness of the MPAs. And 2, as I've said, it helps us learn about the ecosystem. Ultimately, dealing with those 2 questions is what's going to allow us to better manage human activities in the future. In the Ross Sea, what we're trying to do with these comparisons is try to figure out if there's different ecosystem impacts of fishing and from climate change. So this is my last slide. I hope everybody in here, like this Weddell seal, can see the light, can see the value of MPAs, okay? They're an important strategic tool for achieving multiple objectives, providing a portfolio of services that satisfies the world's community of stakeholders. But in order to reap those benefits, we need to have scientific monitoring to go along with it. Thank you.